It started with a notice slapped on a front door at midnight, no name, just a threat dressed up as a fine, and a grainy photo of a car that never left the driveway. By morning, whispers had already spread. Violations, hearings, penalties that made no sense. Then the cameras appeared, unblinking lenses tucked under eaves the homeowner never approved, pointed straight at a child's bedroom window. That's when the first knock came. Not a friendly check-in, a warning. A reminder that in this neighborhood, rules aren't written to protect people, they're written to control them. Every day after, the stakes climbed. Lights left burning all night across the street. Anonymous emails quoting bylaws word for word. A courtesy inspection that left muddy boot prints on a private porch. And still, the fines grew. Numbers scrawled in ink that felt more like a countdown than a ledger. The homeowner kept quiet, watching, recording, waiting for the one mistake that would expose what was really going on behind the polished lawns and clipped hedges. It finally came. An overnight security sweep no one voted for, a confrontation in a driveway, and a line crossed so far it couldn't be walked back. Because when a neighbor's power trip stops being petty and starts being dangerous, the truth doesn't just come out, it explodes. The only question left is simple. When the mask cracks in public, who will be the first to look away? On paper, the neighborhood promised easy living, quiet streets winding between tidy lawns, weekend block parties planned months in advance, and a glossy welcome packet with a smiling couple on the cover holding a golden retriever that looked like it never shed a single hair. It wasn't luxury, but it was stable, the kind of place parents picked for routine and predictability. The homeowner moved in with a short list of hopes: safe sidewalks, friendly nods in the evenings, and the simple comfort of knowing the house key opened more than a door. It unlocked a future. Mornings fell into a rhythm. Coffee first, always, then lunch prep at a kitchen island facing the window that framed a quiet street, an occasional jogger, and a mailbox that clicked shut with the kind of politeness found in small towns and old movies. The neighborhood's soundtrack was ordinary. Sprinklers hissed at dawn, lawnmowers hummed at noon, and kids called to each other at dusk in the hour when the sky glowed like a promise kept. This wasn't a story anyone planned to tell. It was meant to be lived, day by predictable day. The family learned faces quickly. There was the neighbor who waved with his whole arm, the retiree who measured the weather by the way the clouds sat over the roofs, and the couple who organized the fall potluck from a calendar stuffed with perfect handwriting. The HOA board seemed efficient. Newsletters arrived on time, reminders read like helpful nudges, and seasonal flyers slipped under doors with clip art that made everything look less serious than it was. It felt organized, safe, even kind. Inside, life was simple in a way that felt hard-won. There were paint smudges on the baseboards where picture frames kept being adjusted, and a shoe pile that never stayed contained no matter how many baskets were bought. The fridge door was a patchwork of kid art, appointment cards, and a magnet shaped like a house key that said, "Home is where you're paid up." It was a joke, a harmless one, until it wasn't. That first week, the welcome packet made its debut. Rules, procedures, contact numbers, a map with highlighted trails and doodled stars where the best holiday lights appeared in December. In the back, a page titled Community Standards, a ladder of expectations that read like common sense written by someone who had never been tired. It was fine. Expected. The homeowner skimmed it twice, rolled it up, and tucked it into the drawer with the takeout menus and extra keys that never fit anything. If there was a flaw, it was small enough to ignore. A sign at the entrance asking residents to report violations anonymously. Not a request, an invitation. The kind that makes people feel helpful while turning neighbors into watchers. It was printed on letterhead with a watermark, the kind of official detail that suggests care and oversight and, in quieter ways, leverage. Most people passed it without thinking. The homeowner mentioned it once and then let it fade, the way everyone does when they want to believe the best. Spring settled in like an apology for winter. Weekend mornings became front yard hours, pulling weeds, replanting flower beds, and repainting the mailbox that the mail carrier always tapped twice as if for luck. The house, with its fresh trim and careful edging, wasn't perfect, but it was proud. Small improvements stacked like bricks on a foundation. Another hook for the mudroom, a battery backup for the garage door, window locks that clicked with the sound of responsibility. These were the quiet victories of homeownership, the ones that never make headlines but build a life. The HOA board's presence strengthened in spring too. A new newsletter arrived, not just reminders about trash day and pet waste, but a section called Community Integrity, a phrase that sounded noble and felt heavier. It introduced a pilot security initiative, a partnership with a private company offering visibility patrols, courtesy checks, and incident reporting. Words that wore uniforms. It seemed unnecessary for a place where the loudest disturbance was a leaf blower at 7:30 in the morning. Still, reassurance is easy to sell, and it arrived pre-packaged with badge-shaped logos. Across the street, a neighbor installed a doorbell camera that announced itself with a bright blue glow each night. Someone else added a motion light that clicked on every time a car said, flicking like a metronome for anxiety. There was talk about break-ins 2 neighborhoods over, about loitering at the strip mall, about a car parked too long in a cul-de-sac like it was plotting something. The homeowner listened, nodded, and focused on the garden box that was going to finally produce tomatoes this time. It seemed reasonable to keep living as if the street stayed safe because people were decent, not because someone was watching. The first letter arrived in a tone that mistook friendliness for authority. It was addressed to resident, not by name, and it pointed out a minor issue. A trash can left visible from the street for longer than the acceptable window. A warning, not a fine, it promised. Please comply to maintain community standards. The homeowner moved the bin, shrugged, and chalked it up to a misunderstanding. Everyone misses a detail sometimes. The second letter arrived with a timestamp. The homeowner checked the time, remembered the day, a weeknight when dinner ran late and bedtime slipped because a school project needed glue that turned out to be empty. The bin had been moved before midnight. The photo attached caught the lid at an angle, the kind of gotcha image that says, "We were here, we saw." It was signed Compliance. No name, no neighborly note. The homeowner put it aside and decided not to waste the peace of a good evening arguing with a letter. One of the board members waved the next day, 2 fingers lifted from a steering wheel in a practiced, benign gesture. It was the same person who delivered the newsletters with chipper seasonal clip art. That wave had always meant normal, shared community. But small details now felt like clues. The board member's SUV idled a little too long outside houses that had once drawn attention. The yard with the trampoline, the porch with a couch left out over winter, the driveway that hosted a tea. Ian's car with mismatched paint. It wasn't proof of anything, just a feeling. And feelings, like rules, have a way of hardening into facts when they repeat. The first real surge arrived as a stack, not a single strike. 3 envelopes in one day, each a different shade of official. The top warned of a landscaping violation, a hedge encroaching 2 inches beyond the property line, measured apparently by someone with a tape and an appetite for precision that skipped context. The second cited an unapproved exterior modification, which turned out to be a solar path light installed exactly as the welcome packet encouraged under sustainability. The third announced a pending lien review if outstanding balances weren't resolved, balances that had never been noted in any previous mailings. It didn't feel like communication. It felt like choreography. The homeowner laid them out on the counter, lined up the dates, circled the phrases that made the skin prickle. Pending, compliance, final notice, as if warnings had turned into a drumbeat meant to dictate the pace of a household. The portal showed a ledger that didn't match. The fines appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared at new amounts, like numbers could be trained to mislead. A note at the bottom read, "System Cache Variance," which sounded technical and neutral and exactly like something designed to make people stop asking questions. The homeowner saved PDFs of each screen, each date stamp, every shifting fee. The folder grew heavier without gaining weight. Outside, small changes announced a bigger pattern. The security vehicle idled longer near certain houses, always the same ones. Families with kids, older residents who moved slower, the single guy with the motorcycle that wasn't to code for someone's idea of quiet. The patrol logs posted to the newsletter tallied the ordinary as if it were risk. Garage door open at 4:12 p.m. Unknown vehicle parked from 6:08 to 6:23 p.m. Ladder visible from street. These weren't crimes, they were moments. But moments, collected, become leverage. The homeowner kept the routine alive. Work, dinner, homework, the dog's impossible quest to herd slow-moving clouds, but the street started talking louder. A neighbor received a citation for a flag the manual claimed was allowed. Another got dinged for a planter visible over the fence line that had been there before the board's last election. A family down the block found a notice taped to their back gate where no guest would see it but where a camera would. Everywhere the same signatures. Compliance. No name, no human being who would have to own the consequence of ink. At the next board meeting, the agenda bloomed with new phrases. Escalation protocol. Rapid response matrix. Enhanced deterrence. Each sounded like a solution searching for a problem with a face. The board chair leaned into the language of safety, as if comfort required control, as if control required being seen complying. A new policy rolled out. Random courtesy checks would start next week, and refusal to cooperate would be categorized as non-compliance, a circular threat that made denial equal guilt. People shifted in their seats. No one wanted to be the first to get labeled difficult. The homeowner didn't speak in the room. The homeowner prepared outside it. Photos in daylight and dusk, timestamps recorded with the quiet discipline of someone who knows future contradictions need present proof. A copy of the covenants annotated in the margins with questions so simple they sounded like challenges. Who decides? Where is this defined? What is the appeal? Each sticky note was a promise to not be nudged out of reason. Then came the incident that said the quiet part out loud. A courtesy inspection letter arrived while the homeowner was home. The time recorded on the notice matched the hour the front porch camera showed no one approaching. The security log, posted later, claimed a conversation took place with a male resident. The homeowner wasn't that person. The conversation didn't happen. The lie wasn't big enough to be dramatic, but it was precise enough to be intentional. It was a small test. What happens if truth is replaced with record? The homeowner filed a formal dispute using the portal the board had promised would streamline concerns. The submission received an automatic note. Received. 3 days later, another note. Closed. Resolved to satisfaction. Whose satisfaction? No explanation, no call, no revision to the log. The false entry remained, as permanent as the quiet of a page that won't correct itself. The homeowner printed the log and slid it into the folder with a calm that felt like loading ballast. Neighbors compared notes quietly, in fragments that didn't need context. A fine for a hose coiled improperly, a warning about wind chimes after a single complaint, a threat of a hearing for a seasonal wreath that hung one day too long into a new month. Each story carried the same aftertaste, the sense that the standard shifted to meet the target. Fairness is a feeling as much as a framework. Once it goes, everything tilts. A board introduced a new dashboard labeled Community Health, a heat map that glowed brightest where activity was concentrated. It looked scientific. It looked helpful. It also overlaid red over homes already under pressure, turning neighbors into coordinates on a map that gave permission to focus attention. The homeowner's house cooled on the map, then warmed, then cooled again, as if the street itself had a fever. A footnote clarified that activity included anonymous reports that required no verification to count. It was math without meaning, transmuted into policy. The homeowner started sleeping lighter. Not in fear, in vigilance. The mind cataloged every creak, every slow roll of tires against curb, every pause that lasted longer than courtesy. Morning runs shifted to routes that passed notice boards and entry signage. The small habit of scanning for changes set in like a second pulse. New wording appeared on the anonymous reporting sign, "Help keep standards high." The verb did a lot of work. Help as in participate, help as in deputize, help as in absolve. A week later, a letter marked "Final Notice" arrived without any previous notices for the cited issue. Unauthorized signage was the offense, a hand-painted "Welcome Friends" plaque from a craft fair. The line item added a fine and an administrative processing fee that doubled it. A footnote announced that appeals must be submitted within 3 business days of receipt. The letter's postmark was 6 days old. This wasn't procedure, it was entrapment dressed as process. The homeowner appealed anyway, sending screenshots of the portal, the envelope, the postmark, and photos of identical plaques hanging on 5 other doors within a 2-block radius. The reply didn't address any of it. Denied, it read. Further correspondence on this topic may be considered harassment. The sentence sat like a threat loaded with implication. Speak and become the problem. The homeowner logged it, made a copy, and set a reminder to revisit the denial after the next board election cycle. The calendar became a quiet ally. The security patrols changed shape. The vehicle swapped discrete markings for a larger badge logo, the kind that announces presence like a flare. The routes lengthened, then tightened, then waited. The driver often stopped across from the homeowner's house for a moment too long to be accidental, hands moving over a clipboard or a tablet, as if thinking required surveillance to be effective. Visibility, the newsletter called it. The homeowner thought another word. Pressure. A neighbor down the block received a notice for a restricted plant species, a shrub commonly sold at the local nursery, pictured in the HOA's own landscaping guide from 2 years prior. The neighbor removed it. 2 weeks later, the same neighbor received a fine for soil erosion, where the shrub had been. The HOA suggested a replacement. The replacement matched the board chair's front yard. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so precise. The homeowner began compiling a pattern file, not rumors, not feelings, facts, dates, names, photos, the exact words used in letters and on signs. A spreadsheet cross-referenced fines with board meeting agendas and newsletter policy shifts. Correlations emerged that didn't prove intent, but hinted at priorities. Increases in fines after budget shortfalls, spikes in activity after board elections, visibility patrols, strengthened when membership drives lagged. Governance was behaving like a business that needed demand. The first hearing notice arrived with a time the homeowner couldn't make without abandoning a shift. The letter offered a reschedule. The portal offered none. A call to the number on the letter returned a voicemail that promised a call back within 48 hours. None came. The hearing proceeded without the homeowner. The result posted as non-appearance, affirmed. A fee labeled adjudication appeared on the ledger like punctuation. The homeowner felt something change, not the resolve to fight, but the posture. Determination lengthened its spine. A weekend sweep introduced a new tactic. Temporary barriers, placed along certain sidewalks to discourage loitering. The barriers narrowed paths enough to force strollers and wheelchairs onto the street. Safety, in the name of safety, was now asking parents and elders to navigate curbs. Complaints were logged. Replies cited pilot studies. The board promised to evaluate feedback. The barriers remained through 2 rains and 1 holiday parade. At night, a rhythm set in. Patrols at the top of the hour, a pause on the quarter, a slow roll at the half. The homeowner could predict the hum of the engine like a clock. In that predictability, a certain calm. People adapt to patterns, even pressure. But adaptation isn't the same as consent. In the quiet, a plan took shape, made of policy, patience, and illumination. Find the rule that contradicts the practice, find the practice that violates the standard, and choose a moment when the gap is visible to everyone. The moment presented itself when the HOA announced body-worn camera integration for security staff, an upgrade framed as transparency. The policy stated that recordings would be used to resolve disputes. It also stated cameras could be turned off at staff discretion for sensitive interactions. Sensitivity was undefined. The homeowner requested the footage for a cited, face-to-face warning that had never occurred. The response was immediate: no footage available, device was in sensitive mode. The phrase felt like an admission dressed as a policy. Neighbors began to share more openly. One family described a late-night light check that lingered on bedroom windows. Another mentioned a fine issued while they were out of town, corroborated by a photo time-stamped the afternoon of their flight. A single mother with 2 jobs received a letter threatening a lien for an unpaid fine she had proof of paying. The portal showed processing delay. Each story added a layer. The map of the neighborhood redrew itself from cul-de-sacs and lawns into vectors of pressure and pathways of avoidance. Then came an email titled, "Community Standards Refresh," a euphemism with a smile. The PDF extended the list of violations and shifted several from warnings to immediate fines. The grace period for trash cans shortened by hours. The definition of unsightly widened to include tools visible in an open garage. Visible became the hinge, visibility to whom and from where. The homeowner walked the street at eye level, then knee height, then from the angle of a car window, and realized how easily an observer could create violation by choosing vantage. The homeowner filed a public records-like request to the HOA's management company for training materials used by the security vendor. The reply arrived with sections blacked out, not by law but by preference, citing proprietary methods. The visible parts emphasized presence, authority, and documentation. De-escalation appeared once as a bullet point under advanced modules. It was a mirror that reflected the street back with sharper edges. On a quiet afternoon, a security sweep rolled past and stopped, uninvited, at the driveway. The guard stepped out, adjusted a vest, and began photographing the front yard from angles that would make a realtor proud. The homeowner watched from inside, counted the shots, noted the way the camera lens tilted toward the living room window. A notice appeared the next day claiming obstruction of view due to curtains that had hung for years. The letter suggested uniform window treatments as a solution, complete with a discount code for a preferred vendor. Policy had learned to sell. The next board meeting was standing room only. Faces that had stayed polite now tightened at the edges. The homeowner waited, then spoke, not to accuse, but to ask. Questions, simple and lined up like fence posts. What is the appeal process when the portal doesn't reflect the postmark? Who verifies anonymous reports before they become activity? Where is sensitive mode defined in the camera policy? Each question ended in a period, not a threat. In the quiet after, the board chair thanked the homeowner for passion, a word people use when they want to reclassify clarity as emotion. The room didn't relax. It recalibrated. The following week brought the first sign that pressure can crack in more than one direction. A board member resigned for personal reasons. The newsletter skipped a week. The patrol vehicle appeared with a different driver who kept eyes down and hands visible. A neighbor who had stayed out of it dropped off a list of dates and times they'd recorded on their own. Quiet solidarity delivered like a donation. The homeowner added it to the file without ceremony. The moratorium held for 6 days, a thin pause that looked like restraint and sounded like retreat, until the 7th morning when the HOA posted a special compliance operation notice at dawn, 4 words in bold that tried to reclaim momentum with theater. The plan was simple and overwhelming. A neighborhood-wide audit with security, board representatives, and clipboards moving in pairs, documenting deficiencies in real time. It read like procedure and felt like pressure dressed for a parade. The homeowner read it once, twice, then opened the binder and moved every prepared page to the top. No speeches, no rehearsals, just alignment. Before noon, the pairs fanned out. They wore badge-shaped logos and purposeful faces, walking in the slow, proprietary way of people who have mistaken proximity for ownership. Residents stood on porches, arms folded, smiles tight, learning the shape of a day that would be remembered not for what was found, but for how it was done. The homeowner waited at the window, watched the pair assigned to the street, and tracked their route against the pattern map created by neighbors. The sequence matched the pressure grid perfectly. The audit wasn't random. It was a circuit of control. At the exact minute listed on the notice, the pair turned into the homeowner's drive. The security guard adjusted the vest in a practice motion, and the board representative clicked a pen as if the pen were a key that unlocked authority. They began with photos, then angles, then measurements. The homeowner stepped outside with the binder and a second, smaller folder labeled plainly, Policies, Citations, Contradictions. The air felt like a held breath. The street listened without saying a word. The board representative announced the audit focus with phrases that slid off the tongue. Uniform window treatments, visible storage, seasonal decor thresholds, and incidental obstructions. The homeowner nodded once, waited for the list to finish, and opened the folder to a page marked Window Treatments, Covenants 503.7a. The relevant clause sat highlighted. Decorative interior items not explicitly governed. Exterior uniformity applicable only to common-facing structures. No mandated vendor specification. A printout of the newsletter clarification was attached beneath, with the conflicting preferred vendor suggestion circled. The homeowner placed both on the table between them without commentary. Process met proof and stalled. The security guard moved to the side gate, hand hovering at the latch. The homeowner didn't raise a voice or a hand, just opened to a page labeled Access Boundaries Policy 4.2c, paired with the vendor's training outline that allowed observation from public vantage points but prohibited entry without explicit consent or exigency. The homeowner slid forward a screenshot of an email confirming that the security audit did not constitute exigent circumstances. It was a small, neat trap, a rule stated by the very people attempting to bend it. The board representative recalibrated, shifting to the trash bin window, pulling out a measuring tape to establish an angle visible from the street. The homeowner placed a photo from 3 days prior showing an identical angle used to cite a neighbor whose bin had been out for 15 minutes. Beside it, a map showing the patrol route and timestamp, proving the patroller would have had to leave the route to capture the angle. It wasn't just enforcement. It was entrapment by vantage. The table, the homeowner had set an extra folding table that morning, wasn't a prop. It was an arena where claims went to be weighed, not waived. Neighbors drifted closer, casual in posture, intent in silence. Someone had a notepad. Someone had a phone held low. Someone else just had tired eyes learning to focus. The board representative announced non-compliance with a calm voice that expected obedience. The homeowner answered with pages. The denied appeal processed after the deadline. The sensitive mode void that excluded accountability, the rapid adjudication that converted voluntary consent into penalties. Each page spoke in dates and sections instead of indignation. The security guard held still like a piece of furniture that had learned suddenly that it was visible. The turning point arrived not as a shout, but as a single line of text. A phone on the folding table lit up with the subject line that had frozen a boardroom days earlier. A follow-up from the insurance carrier with a request for temporary suspension of security protocols pending review. The language was dry, almost gentle, but it carried weight because it threatened weight. Insurance isn't a suggestion, it's a spine. Without it, boards dissolve quickly from structure into exposure. The board representative read the line, blinked once, and did not touch the side gate again. Around them, the audit tried to continue. A second pair arrived across the street, then stalled as a resident asked a simple question. Please show the policy you're enforcing. A third pair at the corner house took photos at angles that happened to include their own reflection in a window, visible enough for a neighbor to capture from the sidewalk. Visibility had turned. The watchers were being recorded by a community that had learned the shape of procedure and the speed of proof. The board representative attempted a retreat masked as procedure. The audit would proceed, but findings would be held in abeyance. The homeowner slid forward another page, minutes from AM, eating 6 years prior, stating that abeyance required a board vote, not a field declaration. The representative set down the pen and folded the arms, a small admission that the day would not run on scripts. The security guard checked a watch out of reflex. The time didn't help. The calendar had arrived. The climax tightened further when a neighbor stepped forward with a printout no one expected outside a closed office, a section of the vendor contract listing escalation incentives, per-incident fees for enhanced responses, bonuses tied to activity levels, and a clause granting the vendor an option to propose protocol expansions quarterly. The language hummed with conflict of interest. It didn't prove intent, but it explained momentum. Policy hadn't gotten out of hand. It had been paid to move. The street felt the shift like weather. People who'd been quiet edged closer. A retired teacher produced old minutes proving a bylaw had been edited without the required vote. A contractor pointed to bid dates that overlapped curiously with leadership changes. A college student held up a chart mapping the heat map's activity spikes to newsletter donation drives. The pattern wasn't a conspiracy. It was a business model disguised as safety. Once seen, it was hard to unsee. The board representative tried a final maneuver, invoking civility guidelines to end the interaction. The homeowner nodded, then opened to the last section in the smaller folder, a tab titled Public Forum, Rights, Open Meetings Requirements, with a highlight under the sentence guaranteeing residents' right to present grievances with supporting documentation during open sessions. The homeowner pointed down the block to the community center where the special session had been scheduled for late afternoon. There would be microphones, there would be minutes, and there would be a box full of facts. The afternoon unfolded like a quiet march. The folding chairs filled early. The security vendor sent a regional manager in a suit that tried to look less like armor than it was. The board sat in a line, each with a stack of papers that suddenly felt insufficient. The homeowner placed the box on the table, opened the lid, and arranged the sequence like a story that had been waiting for an audience. Portal inconsistencies, denied appeals, policy contradictions, incentive clauses, and the email from the insurance carrier with the phrase that mattered most, suspension pending review. The room didn't need narrating. It needed revealing. The vendor manager presented first, a slideshow with softened corners and bullet points about partnership and prevention. Photos of guards helping residents jump car batteries, smiling at gates, waving at children. The images tried to replace facts with feelings. The homeowner let the slides finish, then began with the quiet gravity of someone holding a ledger. Each item landed with a timestamp, a clause, and a short, sharp sentence that connected the dots without embellishment. Where the vendor said sensitive mode, the homeowner showed an empty log where a warning was alleged. Where the board said abeyance, the minutes said vote required. Where the policy said voluntary, the ledger said penalty for refusal. Emotion surged in waves the room could feel but didn't have to name. Frustration when a grandmother's letter about a midnight light check was placed beside a training slide emphasizing presence. Anger when a single mother's fines, paid and then posted again as processing, were stacked with printouts of ledger cash errors labeled as variance. Vindication when a quiet neighbor who never came to meetings unfolded a spreadsheet showing heat map spikes aligning perfectly with weeks leading into quarterly reports. Triumph. Whispered when the insurance letter sat there like a mirror that doesn't raise its voice, it just reflects. The board chair attempted to cut for time and agenda flow. The homeowner paused, then flipped to a final section titled Remedy Paths, outlining in clean lines the routes forward, an independent audit of the vendor contract, a temporary halt to all fines and liens tied to specific categories until policy clarification and vote. Restoration of the appeals timeline with written acknowledgement of delayed postmarks. Immediate posting of the camera policy with a defined, non-discretionary rule for recording. And a public vote on any future protocol expansions as required by the covenants. It was a counter-move that didn't rage. It governed. Silence hung in the fluorescent light. The vendor manager asked to confer with the board in private. The chair, cheeks tight, requested a 5-minute recess. The room exhaled into whispers. The homeowner didn't chase the recess. The homeowner kept the binder open on the table. Evidence splayed like a map anyone could read. Neighbors came close, fingers tracing lines, heads nodding, not in agreement to a person, but in recognition of a pattern that had made them all smaller. The board returned with faces that had learned what exposure felt like. The chair spoke carefully, as if diction could rebuild trust. A proposal emerged that looked like partial concession, a 30-day extension on all appeal windows, a review of the camera policy, and a task group to evaluate vendor practices. The vendor manager added a promise of enhanced community training. It was relief written in soft focus. It was also not enough. The room didn't clap. The room waited.